I'll never forget the day my dad, Richard, was arrested for embezzlement. It was a Tuesday, mid-November, a cold, gray evening when the first snow fell on Maplewood. The sky was covered with heavy leaden clouds, like a blanket draped over the town. The scent of lasagna made from my mom's recipe still hung in the kitchen. It was warm, spicy, and comforting. Normally, our home, especially after dinner, would be filled with a mix of peace and a slight hustle and bustle. Dad usually hummed deeply at the table, a low rumble interspersed with vowels, as he read the town news or recounted the day's work at Maplewood Millworks. I'd sometimes giggle over my math homework, occasionally catching snippets of his stories. But that night, the sudden, sharp knock at the door stopped everything. It was as if all sounds in our house had ceased, and I could only hear the rapid thumping of my own heart, as if it would burst from my chest. Cold sweat dampened my palms. When I opened the door, two men stood on the threshold. They wore dark suits, their faces grim and emotionless. One had freshly shaved stubble gleaming on his temples. The other's eyes were icy cold. One held out a wallet, flashing a shiny badge inside. FBI, he said, his voice metallic and sharp, echoing through the house, freezing in the air. The cold wind rushed in, but what truly chilled me was the man's icy eyes and the seriousness in his voice. We need to speak with Richard Vance. My dad came to the door immediately, his brows furrowed. He was always calm, nothing easily shook him. But at that moment, surprise quickly gave way to deep concern, as if a shadow had fallen across his face. My stepmom Eleanor came up behind him, elegant yet tense in her silk bathrobe. Her fingers involuntarily gripped her pearl necklace tightly, her knuckles white. Her eyes were tearful, but these tears, like an actor's performance on stage, flickered into existence for a moment, then vanished. There was a second it was there, the next it was gone. What followed was blurry. One of the men began reading my dad his rights. The accusations were laid out: embezzlement, millions of dollars, offshore accounts, my dad's signature. Each word echoed in my brain, turning into a meaningless, muffled whisper. This couldn't be true. My dad would never do such a thing. My dad just looked at me, a silent apology in his brown eyes, as if he was disappointed in himself more for my sake than his own. As if he wanted to explain this strange situation to me, as if everything had slipped from his control. The handcuffs gleamed on his wrists, their cold metal clinking cruelly through the warmth of our home. They took him away. As my dad got into the police car, I saw his shoulders slump, all his usual vigor gone. Eleanor remained standing in the doorway, her face ashen but strangely composed. The corners of her eyes were wet, but there was a faint, almost imperceptible tremor on her lips, which I noticed. It was as if she was hiding a secret, suppressing a joy. This uncanny composure sent shivers down my spine. How could my dad, Richard Vance, a man known and respected in Maplewood for his honesty and hard work, have done such a thing? It felt like a cruel joke, a nightmare. As my dad boarded the police car, I saw Eleanor put her hand on her hip and take a deep breath. Was that a look of relief on her face? Even then, I couldn't be sure, but that image was seared into my mind, constantly unsettling me. My dad's business, Maplewood Millworks, wasn't just a business to us. It had been founded by my great-grandfather, then passed down to my grandpa Thomas, and then to my dad. The smell of sawdust, the hum of the saws, the familiar roar of the machinery, it was all the soundtrack of my childhood. It was like the heart of our town, carrying the story of the Vance family for generations. Those sounds made me feel like my dad was there. Now, everything was silent. The mill gates were locked, the machines hushed. It stood like a colossal ghost, silently waiting. Eleanor had married my dad 5 years ago after my mom passed away. Losing my mom had been devastating for me, the darkest period of my life. With Eleanor's arrival, we tried to find a new balance in our lives. At first, she seemed kind and understanding, treating me well, like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. But over time, I noticed a calculating coldness beneath her politeness. There was never any genuine warmth in her eyes. She started getting more involved in the financial affairs, gradually taking over more of the bookkeeping. She supposedly discovered the discrepancies. She claimed millions of dollars were missing, funneled into offshore accounts with my dad's signature on every transaction. The evidence seemed damning, meticulously collected, presented with a chilling precision. But my dad was meticulous with money. He knew every penny. He liked to keep the accounts himself. And Eleanor's overly neat reports were like a perfect fabrication. It was as if she had planned everything long in advance, not missing a single detail. My dad's accounting records, normally messy and handwritten, were replaced by Eleanor's computer printouts, perfectly organized. This inconsistency gnawed at me, constantly spinning in my mind. Weeks after my dad's arrest, Eleanor started talking about selling the mill. "It's too much of a burden now, darling," she'd murmur, her voice smoother than ever, like newly polished furniture. "With your father gone, we can't possibly keep it afloat. Besides, the legal fees are mounting." There was a greedy glint in her eyes I'd never seen before, like a predator eyeing its prey. A deathly silence had settled over our home, as if its soul had been taken along with my dad. Eleanor, meanwhile, quickly began to fill this void, as if she were building a new life for herself, full steam ahead. She started hosting prospective buyers, sleek men in expensive suits with smooth faces. They were like vultures, scrutinizing the machinery and the sprawling timber yard, as if they were calculating how much they could pocket from every tree. The mill, the symbol of our family, had become an item for sale. I hated it. Losing my dad was already unbearable, but losing Maplewood Millworks, the heart of our family, It felt like losing our past, our future, everything. With my dad in prison, witnessing Eleanor's cold plans every day ignited a deep rebellion within me. But I was helpless. What could I do? I was just a 15-year-old kid. I couldn't focus on my classes at school, and I lay awake at night. I constantly watched Eleanor's every move, not wanting to miss the smallest detail about her. It was as if I was looking for a sign that would betray her. That's when I remembered Grandpa Thomas. He was my dad's father, an eccentric, peculiar, but loving man. He was a history buff, always lost among old books and artifacts. His dusty shelves in the library were like a reflection of his mind. He was a tinkerer, with all sorts of tools and strange inventions in his workshop, as if everything had a purpose. And he was fiercely protective of Maplewood Millworks, loving it more than life itself. Every piece of wood was a story to him. He had passed away suddenly 3 years ago, leaving behind a cluttered workshop and a house full of strange curiosities. His death, even then, had left a void in me. Grandpa and Eleanor never got along. Grandpa openly distrusted her. Even when Eleanor first met my dad, Grandpa had scrutinized her like a magnet, as if searching for an anomaly. I remember one time, when he thought Eleanor had left the room, he whispered to me, "That woman has eyes like a hawk and a heart like a stone, Olivia. Don't take your eyes off her." At the time, those words just sounded like an old man's grumpiness to me. Grandpa commented on everyone. Now every word echoed like a prophecy. Shivers ran down my spine every time I thought of it. Grandpa's grumpiness, perhaps, was much more than just an instinct. It was a rainy Saturday. The sound of raindrops hitting the windows was irritating, just like Eleanor's voice echoing in my brain. Eleanor was out meeting with potential investors, probably sitting in a chic cafe outside of town for another sales pitch. She always took me with her, saying, "You must be by my side, Olivia." But that day, I had told her I was sick, feigning a headache, even pretending to have a fever. I lay quietly in my bed, waiting until I heard Eleanor's car leave the garage. As the engine sound faded, a resolve blossomed within me, like a seed sprouting. I found myself sneaking into Grandpa's old study. It was as if my feet had carried me there. I couldn't control them. Stepping into the room, the familiar smell of old papers, dusty books, and Grandpa's own special tobacco filled my nostrils. It was exactly as he had left it. A half-finished birdhouse on his desk, stacks of old books on the shelves, antique maps hanging on the wall. It felt as if his ghost still sat in his chair. I wasn't alone. I knew it. It felt like his spirit was guiding me. I didn't quite know what I was looking for, just following a feeling. It was as if Grandpa was whispering to me, guiding me in the right direction. I started pulling out books, running my hands over their worn covers, examining each one carefully. I had no specific goal, just to touch them, to feel his presence. I imagined his hands holding those books, trying to absorb his wisdom. Then, behind a row of dusty leather-bound volumes on Oregon history, my fingers caught on a loose panel. I paused for a moment, my heart pounding like a bird in my chest, its sound roaring in my ears. If it made a creaking sound, it could be heard throughout the house. I carefully pried open the panel. Inside was a small, locked metal box. A chill ran down my spine. Grandpa Thomas always loved puzzles and secrets. He had hidden compartments, coded notes. This box definitely hid something, as if the answer to the whole riddle was here. I immediately ran to Grandpa's old workshop. It was even more cluttered and dusty here, tools haphazardly scattered everywhere. On the workbench, in an old button jar, I found a peculiar keychain shaped like a tiny mill wheel, which I'd known was there for years. It had a tiny, shiny key on it. My heart was in my mouth as I inserted the key into the box's lock. It fit perfectly with a faint click. I turned the key and opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a worn leather-bound journal and a single yellowed photograph. The journal's cover was wrinkled from time and dampness, but the title, True Notes, in Grandpa's handwriting, was still legible. In the photo, Eleanor, much younger, probably in her early 20s, stood next to a man I didn't recognize, with a bright fake smile. The man's arm was around Eleanor, in a very intimate pose, too close for just an acquaintance. There was a cynical glint in his eyes. A silent alarm went off inside me, a light clicked on in my brain, as if all the pieces were finally coming together. The journal dated back at least 10 years before my dad met Eleanor, and it was filled with Grandpa's distinctive, messy, but careful handwriting. With trembling hands, I began to read. The first entries detailed Grandpa's suspicions about a con artist named Elara Vance. This woman, he'd read in a regional true crime forum, was known for marrying wealthy, unsuspecting businessmen, systematically draining their assets, and then disappearing. Grandpa mentioned an online forum called Unclaimed Lost Legacies, where stories about this woman committing similar crimes in different states for years were recounted. The forum had long threads describing Elara Vance's tactics, how she chose her victims, and how she always disappeared after a heart attack or accident. The stories were terrifying, each more horrifying than the last. Grandpa had started investigating Eleanor, then his son's new girlfriend, after noticing her striking resemblance to a sketch in an old newspaper clipping he'd kept. The photo of the clipping was even attached to the journal. He wrote about her changing her name multiple times, her vague past, and the unsettling pattern of her previous relationships, ending with her husband's facing financial ruin or worse. He even mentioned some victims having accidents or heart attacks, but never being directly linked to her. My blood ran cold. Eleanor was Elara Vance. All that fraud, all those lies. While my dad and I were grieving my mom's death, She had brought this woman into our lives. And the man in the photo, Grandpa's notes identified him as Silas Mercer, her accomplice, a financial expert who helped her orchestrate the embezzlements. They were a team. Grandpa even mentioned Silas working for a small, obscure accounting firm that had abruptly closed down a few years ago, leaving behind many suspicious financial transactions. Grandpa suspected Eleanor was slowly siphoning funds from Maplewood Millworks. He even mentioned secret audio recordings of Eleanor talking about how she didn't read my dad's letters, didn't care enough about him, and only cared about his money. These recordings were mentioned in the journal, in a small, sealed envelope. Grandpa wrote that he had hidden them in a bank safe deposit box, but he hadn't specified where the box was. This was a new puzzle, my next step, the next missing piece. However, Grandpa hadn't collected enough concrete evidence before his sudden death from a heart attack. His heart attack now seemed terrifyingly suspicious, and I felt a pang of pain, thinking of Grandpa's last moments. Grandpa was certain Eleanor was involved, but he didn't know how to stop her. The last pages of the journal were filled with a sense of urgency, as if Grandpa sensed that something was imminent, a trap was being set. Just then, I heard the front door open. Eleanor's high heels clicked on the hardwood floors, approaching. She was back early. Maybe her meeting with investors had been cut short, or something had suddenly occurred to her, or she had simply come back to check on me as usual. I quickly shoved the journal and photo back into the secret compartment, closing the panel just as her footsteps paused outside the study door. My heart pounded like a wild drum in my chest, its sound roaring in my ears. I felt breathless, each breath burning my lungs. The door creaked open, and Eleanor's head peered in. Her face held a strange, sharp expression. Her eyes were so sharp, it was as if they could pierce right through me. "What are you doing in here, darling?" Her voice was sweet as always, but it held an icy edge, like a fragile sheet of ice. I mumbled something about looking for an old photo album, trying my best to keep my voice steady, my mouth dry. Eleanor stepped in, her eyes narrowed, scanning me from head to toe. It was as if she was trying to read my mind, to feel every nerve. She seemed to be trying to figure out if anything in the room's arrangement had changed. Her gaze paused for a moment on the spot where the secret compartment was, but then she shrugged, probably annoyed by the mess or my strange behavior, and turned, walking away. I exhaled, my hands still trembling. She hadn't found anything. Not yet, but her gaze, like a predator watching its prey, had left a mark on my mind. I knew I was entering this battle alone. For my dad, for Grandpa, and for Maplewood Millworks. The next few days, I lived under Eleanor's shadow, as if every breath I took was under her control. I was in a constant state of fear and paranoia. Eleanor watched my every move, her eyes like a hawk. I was interrogated at the slightest deviation, as if I were in an interrogation room. Even at breakfast, I felt her piercing gaze across the table, as if she were trying to read my mind. She started taking my phone at night, claiming it was for my own good, so I wouldn't stay up too late. But I knew this was her way of controlling me and cutting off my connection to the outside world. I was practically under house arrest. She even installed a security camera in the hallway outside my room. The small red light blinked constantly, like a malevolent eye, reminding me that she was watching me at all times. I couldn't find peaceful sleep. Even in my dreams, she pursued me. I knew I couldn't risk keeping the journal at home. Eleanor would find it sooner or later, or worse, she would follow Grandpa's clues. This was a matter of life and death for me. At school, during lunch break, I secretly went to the library. I told my friends I had to stay to finish a project, trying to keep my voice as natural as possible, as if I was doing the most boring history assignment, even grumbling a little. The librarian, Miss Davison, was always a kind elderly woman. She usually let me stay late, which was a blessing for me, like a gift from fate. As the hours passed, the library emptied, and only the hum of old computers and the ticking of the wall clock could be heard. Every tick synchronized with my heartbeat, the tension rising steadily. With trembling hands, I carefully photographed every page of Grandpa's journal with my phone. I double-checked each image for clarity, making sure the glare from the fluorescent lights didn't obscure the text. Some pages were so old that the ink had begun to fade, while others were hastily scribbled, almost illegible notes from Grandpa. Every word, every drawing was vital to me, as if I was studying a treasure map. After taking the photos, I created a secure cloud account with a fake name and uploaded everything. My heart pounded as I watched the upload bar slowly fill, as if every second lasted an eternity. Every megabyte felt like a step towards my dad's freedom. Then I deleted the photos from my phone's gallery, even emptying the recently deleted album, just in case Eleanor checked. She checked my phone every evening as if to make sure everything was in order. I was being closely monitored. I knew that even the smallest piece of evidence could betray me. The entries in the journal became increasingly frantic as Grandpa's investigation progressed. He detailed his findings about Elara Vance and her connections to Silas Mercer. Fake identities, shell corporations, millions of dollars allegedly laundered through a specific bank in the Cayman Islands. Everything was meticulously organized, like a flawlessly executed fraud scheme. Grandpa suspected Eleanor was slowly siphoning funds from Maplewood Millworks. He even mentioned secret audio recordings of Eleanor, talking about how she didn't read my dad's letters, how she didn't care enough about him, and how she only cared about his money. These recordings were mentioned in the journal, in a small, sealed envelope. Grandpa had written that he had hidden them in a bank safe deposit box, but he hadn't specified where the box was. This was a new riddle, my next step, the next crucial piece. However, Grandpa hadn't collected enough concrete evidence before his sudden death from a heart attack. His heart attack now seemed terrifyingly suspicious, and I felt a pang of pain, thinking of Grandpa's last moments. Grandpa was certain Eleanor was involved, but he didn't know how to stop her. The last pages of the journal were filled with a sense of urgency, as if Grandpa sensed that something was imminent, a trap was being set. I needed to find Marcus Thorne. Grandpa's journal contained his contact information in a coded message, a series of seemingly random numbers and letters written in the margin next to a chess diagram. I had played chess with Grandpa since I was a child, so I was familiar with his methods of encryption. I spent hours in the library, poring over old chess books, carefully comparing each one. Finally, I found the key in some small marginal notes. After a few more hours, I cracked the code. Marcus Thorne's phone number and address appeared. The address was quite outside Maplewood, in a small, almost deserted town, secluded from prying eyes. The next day, during my lunch break at school, I ran to the payphone outside. The phone, old and rusty, stood like a forgotten relic at the base of an ancient tree in the school's backyard. I told my teacher I felt sick and needed some fresh air, clutching my stomach and wincing as if I was about to vomit. When I picked up the receiver, my hand trembled. I dialed the number, each press like a beat in my heart. I was calling Marcus Thorne. His voice was cautious at first, speaking with the grim determination fitting a detective, but when I mentioned Grandpa Thomas and Elara Vance, his tone changed. It was as if we had suddenly broken through a wall, and a bridge of trust was instantly built between us. He told me we needed to meet immediately. We set a neutral location, the old lighthouse at Cape Mears. It was about an hour's drive away, a very secluded spot where no one would see us. I had to go there after school. I told Eleanor I'd be staying late at a friend's house for a group project, choosing my words carefully. I knew Eleanor was suspicious, so I asked my history teacher to confirm it to her when she called. My teacher grumbled a bit but agreed, probably annoyed by the extra work, or perhaps she feared Eleanor too. After school, I ran, breathless, hoping Marcus would be waiting for me at the old lighthouse in Cape Mears. My legs burned as I ran, my lungs ached, but I didn't stop. The lighthouse, like an ancient, moss-covered giant, stood defiant against the wild waves of the Pacific. The wind whipped at my skin, plastering my hair to my face, but my resolve inside was much stronger than the cold air outside. Marcus's worn but reliable Ford F-150 pickup truck was waiting for me in the parking lot, its engine running. As I got in, I felt a sense of relief, as if I had finally reached a safe harbor. The car seat smelled of old leather. I handed him my phone from my backpack and began showing him the photos of Grandpa's journal, Marcus's face darkening with each swipe. He meticulously examined the internal monologues, dates, bank accounts, and notes detailing Elara Vance's frauds. The part where Grandpa mentioned the bank safe deposit box and the audio recordings inside particularly caught his attention. He was taking notes. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice trembling but firm, "Grandpa knew this woman was dangerous. His death, it wasn't a heart attack. Was it? The journal mentions poison." My lips were dry and I bit my tongue. Marcus sighed heavily, his gaze fixed on the ocean, as if looking into the waves of the past. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice grave. "When your grandfather first asked me about this woman, I was suspicious. As I delved deeper into my investigation, I found that Elara Vance's victims usually had heart attacks or accidents. But I never had enough concrete evidence. The autopsies were superficial, no one suspected anything, or those who did were silenced. Now this journal," his eyes brightened, like a light piercing through desperation. "This is incredible evidence, Olivia. Your grandfather was a very intelligent man. These audio recordings, if we can find them, they will change everything. We can crack this case. But we need the original journal, and we need to find Silas Mercer. He's the key. If he confesses, it's an airtight case. I've been tracking Silas Mercer. He was last seen in Miami, living in a luxury villa, but his identity is fake. He'll be hard to find." Getting the journal was risky. I waited for Eleanor to be at one of her investor meetings. These meetings usually started in the afternoon and lasted until late evening. That morning, as she left the house, she gave me a long, scrutinizing look, as if she smelled something amiss. I was nervous, but I had no other choice. I waited for Eleanor to leave. Finally, when her voice faded, I quietly ran to my room. I retrieved the journal from the secret compartment, my trembling hands slipping it into my backpack. The leather cover felt familiar against my hand, and I felt Grandpa's presence. My heart pounded faster every second, as if it would burst from my chest. But just as I was about to leave the house, Eleanor's car suddenly pulled into the driveway, the sound of tires screeching on the asphalt. She was back early. Maybe a deal had gone wrong, or something had suddenly occurred to her, or she had just come back to check on me as usual. "Where are you going, Olivia?" Her voice was low and threatening, like the wind before a storm, sending shivers down my spine. Her eyes narrowed, gleaming with suspicion, as if a killer was weighing me with their gaze. She walked directly to my backpack, her face taut, her nails digging into her palms. I tried to block her, but she easily pushed me aside, as if I were an insignificant fly. Her fingers plunged into my backpack, found the journal, and pulled it out with an angry jerk. Eleanor's face, usually so calm and controlled, contorted with rage as she saw Grandpa's familiar handwriting. "You little sneak!" she shrieked, her scream echoing through the house, as if the walls themselves were trembling, the windows rattling. She raised her hand and slapped me across the face, hard enough to send me reeling. My nose started to bleed, my head spinning. Salty tears and the warmth of blood streamed down my cheek. My mouth tasted of iron, and my stomach churned. "Do you think you can play detective?" she sneered, her voice like the hiss of a venomous snake. She began tearing pages from the journal, shredding each one into tiny pieces. Each ripping sound tore at my heart, as if a knife was plunged into it. "This is a fantasy, Olivia. Your crazy grandpa's ramblings, and you're just like him clinging to illusions," she snarled, her voice like a monster's roar. The paper fragments from the journal, the faded ink of the worn pages, fluttered in the air, falling to the ground like Grandpa's last hopes. As tears streamed from my eyes, I looked at the tiny pieces on the floor. It was gone. The original evidence. Eleanor seemed to revel in my despair, her cruel smile returning to her face. She threw the shredded pages over me like confetti. "Now what are you going to do?" she taunted. "Your dear old dad is going to jail for a very long time, and this mill will be mine. No one will believe you." I sat on the floor, bleeding, feeling like everything was over. Eleanor gave me one last contemptuous look and walked out of the room. When she slammed the door behind her, a sense of emptiness settled in the house, as if all the air had been sucked out. As I looked at the blood and paper fragments on the floor, I was afraid of succumbing to despair. But then Grandpa's words came to mind. "Never give up, Olivia. The truth always comes to the surface." And Marcus's words, "We still need Silas Mercer." I gathered my strength. Even though the journal was destroyed, I still had my digital copies. Hope wasn't completely lost. The battle continued. The days after Eleanor destroyed the journal turned into a torment. She kept me under virtual house arrest. She took my phone, locked my bedroom door from the outside at night, and never let me out of her sight. I even had to ask for permission to go to the bathroom. She brought me all my meals, as if she wanted to cut off every connection I had with the outside world. I was like a prisoner in my own home, feeling trapped in a cage. And worst of all, she started talking about sending me to a special boarding school in another state. A remote place in the California mountains, with no phones and strict rules. I knew it was more like a prison than a school. A cell disguised as a rehabilitation center. "This will be good for you, Olivia," Eleanor would say, with a cold smile, her eyes glinting with revenge. "You need to get rid of all these conspiracy theories. Your mind needs to clear." I knew this was her plan to completely isolate me, to silence me for good. She wanted to make me disappear without a trace, just like Grandpa. But I wasn't giving up. I remembered an old, unused landline in Grandpa's basement, hidden behind some boxes. It was a corner where my dad used to play when he was little, a place full of childhood memories. One night, while Eleanor was busy on a business phone call in the living room, her voice carried to the kitchen along with the rustling of papers. I waited for Eleanor to leave the room, then quietly crept down the stairs. My bare feet made no sound on the old wooden floor, but I listened to every creak, as if any sound could betray me. I found the dusty, cobweb-covered old landline. When I picked up the receiver, after a dead silence, I heard a static crackle. My heart pounded, as if it would burst from my chest. I dialed Marcus's number. When he picked up, I spoke quickly, in a whisper. I told him about the boarding school, the danger, the urgency. I swallowed my words, afraid Eleanor might come back at any moment, as if my mouth had gone dry. Marcus's voice on the phone was calm but firm. "Pack a small bag, Olivia," he said, his voice more than a whisper, almost a command. "Be ready tomorrow morning. We'll come pick you up." His voice was deep and self-assured, instilling a sense of trust in me. "We found Silas," he said, "and they're questioning him now. It wasn't easy. It took us a few days, but we caught him. He's talking now, and then we're going straight to the police. Everything will be over." These words sparked a ray of hope within me, like a light shining in the darkness. We were one step closer to my dad's freedom. The next morning, Eleanor drove me to what she claimed was a doctor's appointment. I felt a tension inside me, as if the air was charged with electricity. But the route wasn't familiar. Soon, we pulled up to a secluded, imposing building that looked more like a prison than a school. This was the boarding school, gray and cold. As Eleanor turned off the engine and took the keys out of the ignition, Marcus's worn but reliable Ford F-150 pickup truck screeched to a halt behind us, blocking the entire driveway. Eleanor's face turned ashen as she saw what was in her rearview mirror, as if the blood had drained from her face. Eleanor's eyes widened in horror. Her usually controlled expression shattered, as if a mask had fallen. Marcus got out of the car, followed by a man I immediately recognized from Grandpa's photo, Silas Mercer. His face was bruised and discolored. He looked terrified, handcuffed, and escorted by a uniformed police officer. They had caught Silas. A cheer rose within me, a silent scream of triumph. Eleanor Vance, also known as Elara Vance, Marcus's voice echoed clearly and loudly, its reverberation breaking all silence. Even the birds hushed. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, embezzlement, and the wrongful imprisonment of Richard Vance, and suspicion of the murder of Thomas Vance. Furthermore, you will also be charged with numerous counts of forgery and fraud." Marcus pointed at Silas with his finger. Silas looked directly at Eleanor, his face a mixture of fear and, finally, accumulated anger. I saw Eleanor's back hunch, her shoulders slump. There was no escape for her now. Eleanor's last bit of control completely shattered. She lunged at Silas in a fury, screaming, "You spineless rat! You promised you wouldn't talk!" Her voice was ugly and cruel. The true monster within her had emerged, her eyes bloodshot. The police officer quickly restrained her. Eleanor struggled wildly, trying to claw at the officer's face like a tiger, a predatory animal. Silas, emboldened by the presence of Marcus and the police, began to confess. He detailed everything. How Eleanor had approached him years ago with this plan, how they targeted unsuspecting businessmen, how they systematically siphoned off money, how they framed my dad, and how Eleanor had orchestrated Grandpa Thomas's heart attack when he got too close to the truth. Silas spoke of a slow-acting poison that caused Grandpa's death, describing how Eleanor had secretly put it in his coffee. He even detailed how traces of the poison had been overlooked in Grandpa's autopsy. His confession was meticulous, supported by the digital evidence from Grandpa's journal, bank statements Marcus had already obtained, and even the secret audio recordings of Eleanor's disparaging conversations about my dad. The audio recordings from Grandpa's bank safe deposit box contained all of Eleanor's plans and confessions with Silas. Everything was heard from her own mouth. This evidence would seal her fate. Eleanor was dragged away, still screaming threats and denials. The police put her into the patrol car, her pearl necklace still clutched tightly in her hand, like her last fortress, but it was useless now. As Eleanor was driven away, she gave me a hateful glare. Her eyes held anger and malice, like the gaze of a venomous snake. I would never forget that look, the last time I saw her. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of relief, a deep breath I could finally take. Justice was served. As the sun set, a strange silence fell over Maplewood, as if the town too had finally breathed, and a dark shadow had lifted from above us. My dad was released from prison 2 days later. When we went to pick him up, his face was pale, his eyes tired, and deep lines had formed on his forehead. But when he saw me, his eyes filled with an indescribable relief, as if all his cells had come alive. I ran and hugged him, tighter than I had ever hugged anyone, as if I would never let him go again. He smelled of factory soap and sadness, but he was still my dad, the strong man I knew. In that moment, the silence between us was more comforting than any words. All I knew was that he was finally home. When we returned home, he sat on the old couch that belonged to my mom, ran his hand through my hair, and just said, "I missed you so much, my little bird." His eyes were welling up. Eleanor's trial was swift, like a storm passing quickly. Silas Mercer's testimony, combined with Grandpa's meticulously kept journal entries, verified by handwriting experts from the digital copies, the bank records, and the re-examination of Grandpa's autopsy, which now revealed traces of a slow-acting poison, left no room for doubt. It became clear that Eleanor had initiated this plan years ago, that targeting my dad was no coincidence, but a carefully chosen victim. She was found guilty on all counts, including murder. The prosecutor demanded the harshest possible sentence for her, seeking full justice. She received multiple life sentences without parole. Silas received a reduced sentence for his cooperation, but he was still given a long prison term. Life in prison would not be easy for him. Maplewood Millworks was saved. The entire town rallied around my dad, offering support and help. The employees, showing their loyalty once more, even offered to work for free, acting in the true spirit of Maplewood. The first few months were tough. My dad had changed. He was quieter, with a haunted look in his eyes. He started seeing a therapist twice a week, specializing in wrongful conviction trauma, slowly trying to process the horror he had endured. He was still restless at home, sometimes flinching at door sounds, obsessively checking locks, even getting up in the middle of the night to ensure the door was locked while I was asleep. I would hear him getting up in the middle of the night and sitting alone in the kitchen. I also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Albright. She helped me process Eleanor's betrayal, the fear I had felt, and the grief I had experienced. Trauma was like a deep river, but Dr. Albright taught me how to build bridges to cross it. It was a long and difficult road, but slowly, my nightmares began to fade. I started to feel safe more often. I no longer feared shadows, and I didn't feel the need to leave the lights on at night. My dad and I began to rebuild our lives and the mill. In the evenings, we would talk for long hours, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything, discussing how Eleanor had manipulated my dad, her obsession with money, and how she had filled the void after my mom's death. My dad listened patiently, wanting to hear every detail, as if he wanted to fully comprehend this nightmare. He was incredibly proud of my courage, calling me the real detective, with a slight smile on his face. Marcus Thorne became a close family friend, often stopping by the mill for coffee, offering legal advice, and just being a steady presence. He helped my dad navigate the legal aftermath, and even caught a few petty fraudsters in Maplewood, thanks to his renewed sense of purpose. He was dedicated to the town, as if completing Grandpa's unfinished work. Life found a new rhythm. The scent of sawdust returned, but this time, it smelled of hope and healing. My dad started working at the mill again, not as an owner burdened by financial woes, but as a craftsman, reconnecting with the wood and the people he loved. A smile would appear on his face when his hands touched the cold metal of the machines once more. He even started dating again, a kind teacher named Sarah from town, whom our family had known for years. Sarah was warm and genuine, and she made my dad laugh again. When he was with her, that haunted look in his eyes diminished, replaced by peace. Years passed. High school ended. I danced with my dad at the prom, thinking about how far we had come with every step. I went to college, majoring in forensic accounting and criminal justice, inspired by Grandpa's meticulous notes and my own experience. I wanted to help others who were victims of hidden crimes to bring the truth to light. This had become my life's mission. On my graduation day, my dad and Sarah were there, beaming with pride, my dad trying to hide his tears. Marcus Thorne, now a full-time private investigator, specializing in cold cases, also came, along with many of the mill workers who had stood by my dad. The bleachers were full, everyone cheering for me, my name echoing with their applause. As I walked across the stage, I thought of Grandpa Thomas. His eccentricities, his distrust, his hidden journal, they had saved us all. He had seen the truth when no one else would, and he had laid the groundwork for justice. I realized that courage isn't just about grand gestures, but often about quiet vigilance, about fiercely believing in something, and about the small, determined acts that can unravel the biggest lies. And sometimes it takes a hidden secret, tucked away in an old study, to bring everything out into the light. Surviving was a victory, but more importantly, it was about healing and moving forward. My dad and I, along with Sarah, had built a new life. Even though Eleanor's shadow still occasionally fell upon us, it no longer defined us. We had survived. And that meant everything. Our story continued to be whispered in Maplewood, but it was no longer a tragedy, but a story of salvation and resilience. We were no longer living in the shadow of the past, but with the hope of the future. As I breathed in that old, familiar scent of sawdust with my dad, I understood once again how precious and fragile life was. Everything was over, and we, finally, were free. As the sun shone on the roof of Maplewood Millworks, it sparkled like a harbinger of a new beginning.